We weren't even allowed to like think of the possibility of having our own self-determination. The idea of like our domination became the natural order, such that a lot of people don't even recognize the importance of self-determination.
It's not only physical colonization,
it's mental colonization. I hope that the American Empire does fall. You know, one can only hope. On a practical level, that the people who tend to control an area has less to do with whether or not they're indigenous to that area, but more to do with like the level of organized violence and power they're able to exert to control that area. And like, while I do think it is ethical for indigenous people to have control over the land that they are from, this is like a long and complicated history, right?
So if we look at all indigenous people, different indigenous peoples have different aspirations. So like Native Americans, first of all, they're not one nation, they're many different nations. And they also don't believe in countries. They believe that land owns man, not that man owns land. Whereas Tibetans do believe in a country. And so different aspirations are for different people, and we shouldn't place it across the board. So what you have is the civilization of Judea, of the Jewish people, the Native people. The Romans come and conquer that civilization, pass it down to different colonial empires, and eventually, lastly being the British, the Jews revive their civilization and free their land from the British. So idealistically, according to morals, that's okay, and according to like what's currently in control, that's okay as well.
I don't know that like everything that's going on is okay, but like
it's not about indigeneity. That's a whole other conversation. We can have that conversation about, are certain things that Israel's doing right or wrong? Could it be better?
In the grand scheme of human history, because I don't ascribe to like any religions really, like I don't know that humans like necessarily like are indigenous to anywhere but like Africa, in terms of like human beings in the grand, you know, in the grand scheme. Like humans multiplied, we went everywhere, and then we started fighting over like where we come from.
So the question is, do you think there's validity in there being a nation? Like, are Native Americans?
I don't think any nations are valid. No.
So no Native Americans, no Tibetans, no Aboriginals, no Yazidis?
not like borders drawn on maps.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like nations as a people with a connection to the land.
Nations aren't cultures. I think cultures are different.
I'm talking about modern nations, not America.
But like cultures. Sure, okay. Like a people's culture, that's valid.
And are they allowed to have a connection of their culture to a specific piece of land?
Yeah.
And are they allowed to express self-determination in the way that they see fit for their own people? Like the way that they've always done? So that's kind of like what Israel is. Like Jewish, by the way, you mentioned religion. I'm Jewish, but I don't see Judaism as a religion.
Yeah, sure.
Because I see it as a people from Judea.
I just meant like in terms of like, people have different ideas about like how people came to be on this earth in the first place, whether they were created by God or whether you ascribe to, we evolved from, you know, from the ocean and apes, and we came from Africa and spread the worldwide. When you say that like a group of people is indigenous to a place, it's more like this culture, not like these, because human beings didn't like start there. It's like your culture sort of like propagated there, and your culture has a tie to that land. So I'm Hawaiian, and like the Hawaiian kingdom has been completely overthrown by the USA ever since, you know, and like we haven't had any like real self-determination of our land ever since.
Can I ask you about your people? Do your people seek to one day achieve that self-determination?
People have, yeah, but they constantly get shut down by the US government.
But would you say that's like a small like outset, or is that like a main kind of like cultural? I
think it is a pretty popular cultural movement, which especially is gaining more steam today, but you have to recognize that like American rhetoric has completely sort of like moved through. I mean, like our language was criminalized. We weren't even allowed to speak our own language or practice our own culture.
Same for the Jewish people under the British.
Sure, yeah. Like, and I'm sure you can relate to that. Absolutely. Like, we weren't even allowed to like. In many cases, we weren't even allowed to like think of the possibility of having our own self-determination. The idea of like our domination became the natural order, such that a lot of people don't even recognize the importance of self-determination.
Not only physical colonization,
it's mental colonization. And so it's, when, you know, I do think that like the Hawaiian people should have self-determination to their like land. Are they gonna get it back? Like, no, because like the physical and even mental dominance of like U.S. hegemony is such that I don't know, without like a massive popular revolution.
You know, empires rise and fall, so at some point America is not going to be the same.
Yeah, I hope that the American empire does fall. You know, one can only hope.
So basically we're out here to like kind of show people that if you're pro the Polynesians like reviving their civilization and having self-determination, or the Tibetans, or the Aboriginals, or all these populations, then why not be also for when the Jews revived Judea, when they revived their own civilization? Now, of course, for sure, there's ethnic conflict that exists today between Palestinians and Israelis, and that can be touched on. But that shouldn't be associated to the right for the Jewish people to self-determine to their land.
Sure. So do you, I guess, my understanding is that the presence of this conversation and this table has to do with the conflict with the Palestinians.
No, I mean, this conversation is open, and if that's what someone wants to talk about, that's what we can talk about.
Right.
The conversation is like, why do Jews have a right to live there? Because oftentimes people try to claim that Jews are a bunch of like white people from Europe that converted to Judaism to come back.
Well, that's not true.
Right, but so many people think that.
Yeah.
And so they say that Israel doesn't have legitimacy, and it took away the land and the country of another people, which no country existed prior to that besides Judea.
From where I'm standing, I don't think that like any group of people has any sort of like supreme or primary right to make a nation and make sort of like laws that...
What about your people on your land?
I mean, the way that I would see it is that like in my sort of like ideal situation, because what I'm talking about is like what would be ideal, not how the world is right now, but like there would not really be these distinctions of like race, you know, nor would there be borders. Like we would just be humans and we would live communally and respect each other, ideally. And I know that that's a pretty picture to paint, but like...
I don't believe in race either, by the way.
I just don't, I don't believe in nationalism, and so like...
but you believe that like native peoples have a right to preserve their identity. That's what, when I say nation of Israel, I mean that. Like I mean the nations that exist, the Native American nations, the Native Canadian nations, the Tibetan as a nation. I don't mean as like a modern nation state with like an oppressive system that exists where you try, like that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a nation as a group of people that have a cultural connection, historical indigenous connection to a specific piece of land that is fundamentally tied to who they are. Like you living here now in like mainland America, right? You still have a connection back to your homeland no matter what, and your kids will and their kids will after, hopefully. So it's a connection that's not even based on if you're born there or not. It's something that's fundamentally connected to who you are. So that's kind of like what the Jewish people are. We have fundamental connection to our land, and wherever we were displaced, first of all, we were never allowed to integrate everywhere, and we're always, you know, persecuted and exterminated for being another. But we always maintain like a connection to our land with the vision of one day coming back home, which was accomplished in 1948. And I think today people look at the conflict, and instead of dealing with the conflict of...
Do you say that for, as in like that is like an equality of like all Jewish people?
All Jewish people are native to the land of Judea. Culturally, historically, genetically, and in every single way. Like, for example, within our culture, you can convert to Judaism, meaning you can join the people. And for us, you're just as indigenous to Israel as someone that's genetically Jewish. Because it's a collective identity and connection, not an individual one.
Okay. Well, dude, I appreciate the talk. I gotta get back to homework.
Good luck.
Yeah.
If you'd like to see more videos, please support us by clicking on the links below.